Today we are going to talk about the incredible journey of Saint Francis of Assisi, one of the most beloved and inspiring figures in the history of Christianity. His story is not just the story of a man who lived many centuries ago, but the story of a transformation so profound that it continues to touch hearts across the world today. It is a journey from comfort to sacrifice, from ambition to humility, and from a life focused on personal glory to one centered entirely on love, compassion, and service. Francis was born around the year 1181 in the town of Assisi in Italy, a place nestled among hills and known for its natural beauty. During that period, Assisi was part of a rapidly changing world. Trade was growing, cities were expanding, and new opportunities were emerging. Francis was born into a family that benefited from these changes. His father, Pietro, was a successful cloth merchant who traveled often and built a prosperous business. Because of this, Francis grew up in a household that enjoyed comfort and stability. From an early age, Francis was surrounded by opportunities that many others did not have. He had access to good clothing, fine food, and social activities. His upbringing allowed him to experience the pleasures of life, and he quickly developed a personality that was both lively and outgoing. He enjoyed music, poetry, and gatherings with friends. People were drawn to his cheerful nature, and he became known as someone who brought energy and excitement wherever he went. As a young man, Francis dreamed of achieving greatness. He admired the ideals of knighthood, which represented bravery, honor, and recognition. Like many others of his time, he imagined himself becoming a hero, gaining respect through acts of courage. These dreams were shaped by the culture around him, where stories of knights and battles were widely celebrated. However, life would soon take a direction that he did not expect. During his youth, Francis became involved in a conflict between the towns of Assisi and Perugia. These conflicts were part of the political struggles that existed between cities, each seeking influence and control. Francis joined the fight with enthusiasm, hoping to prove himself and fulfill his dreams of glory. The reality of war, however, was far different from his expectations. The experience was harsh, uncertain, and filled with danger. During the conflict, Francis was captured and taken prisoner. This marked the beginning of one of the most difficult periods of his life. He spent about a year in captivity, separated from his family, his friends, and the comforts he had always known. This time in prison became a turning point. Removed from the distractions of his former life, Francis had time to reflect. He began to think deeply about his choices, his goals, and the direction his life was taking. The dreams that once seemed so important began to lose their appeal. Instead, new questions began to arise within him. What is the true purpose of life? What gives lasting meaning and fulfillment? These questions would stay with him long after his release. When Francis finally returned to Assisi, those around him noticed a change. Although he resumed his daily life, there was a quiet shift in his attitude. The excitement and ambition that once defined him were no longer as strong. He began to feel a sense of restlessness, as though something within him was calling for a different path. During this period, Francis began to withdraw from some of his former activities. He spent more time alone, reflecting and observing the world around him. He became more aware of the suffering of others, particularly the poor and the sick. This awareness touched him deeply and began to shape his actions. One of the most powerful moments in his transformation came when he encountered a man suffering from leprosy. At that time, people with this illness were often avoided and excluded from society. Fear and misunderstanding led many to keep their distance. Francis himself initially felt this same fear. However, something within him pushed him to act differently. Instead of turning away, he chose to approach the man. This decision was not easy, but it was deeply meaningful. Francis offered help, kindness, and compassion. In doing so, he overcame not only his fear but also a barrier that separated him from others. This moment is often seen as a key step in his transformation, marking a shift from self-centered living to a life focused on others. Another important moment occurred when Francis visited a small and damaged church known as San Damiano. The building was in poor condition, reflecting neglect and decay. While praying there, Francis experienced something that would guide the next stage of his life. He felt a call encouraging him to rebuild the church. At first, Francis understood this call in a literal way. He believed he was meant to repair the physical structure of the building. Motivated by this belief, he began to gather materials and work to restore the church. He even used his own resources, sometimes causing tension with his family, who did not fully understand his actions. However, as time passed, Francis began to realize that this call had a deeper meaning. The message was not only about rebuilding a physical structure but also about renewing the spiritual life of people. This realization marked the beginning of a much larger mission. Francis made a decision that surprised many around him. He chose to give up his wealth, his possessions, and the comfortable life he had always known. This decision was not made lightly. It required courage, conviction, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. By choosing simplicity, he was rejecting the values that had once guided his life. He began living among the poor, sharing their struggles and offering support. His life became a reflection of the message he wished to share. He spoke about repentance, peace, and love for God, but more importantly, he lived these values every day. People were moved by his sincerity and authenticity. Over time, others began to take notice. His way of life, so different from what they were used to, attracted those who were searching for meaning. Some chose to follow him, forming a small community dedicated to the same principles. This community would later grow into what is known as the Order of Friars Minor. Francis emphasized humility, simplicity, and service. He believed that true happiness came not from possessing things but from giving and sharing. His teachings were simple yet profound, making them accessible to people from all walks of life. As the small group of followers around Francis began to grow, something remarkable started to take shape. What had begun as a simple personal transformation was now becoming a movement. These men were inspired not only by Francis's words but by the way he lived each day. They saw in him a sincerity and a joy that could not be explained by material wealth or social status. Instead, it came from a deep sense of purpose and connection to something greater than himself. This growing community eventually became known as the Order of Friars Minor, often called the Franciscans. The name itself reflected their identity. They saw themselves as lesser brothers, choosing humility over importance and service over recognition. They committed to living simply, without accumulating wealth, and dedicated themselves to helping those in need. Their mission was not to separate themselves from the world but to live within it, bringing compassion, kindness, and hope wherever they went. Francis gave his followers guidance that was both simple and powerful. He encouraged them to live with honesty, to treat others with respect, and to trust in God rather than in material possessions. He believed that by letting go of the desire for wealth and control, people could experience a deeper kind of freedom. This message resonated with many, especially during a time when society was becoming increasingly focused on trade, wealth, and power. As the Franciscans traveled from place to place, their presence began to have a noticeable impact. They preached in towns and villages, cared for the sick, and supported the poor. Their way of life stood in contrast to the growing materialism of the time, offering an alternative that was rooted in simplicity and compassion. People were drawn to their message because it was lived out in practical and visible ways. One of the most unique aspects of Francis's life was his deep connection with nature. He saw the natural world not as something separate from human life but as something deeply connected to it. He believed that all of creation reflected the goodness of God and deserved respect. This perspective was unusual for his time and continues to be one of the most admired parts of his legacy. Stories about Francis often describe his interactions with animals and the environment. These stories are not just simple tales but expressions of his belief that every part of creation has value. He spoke of the sun, the moon, the wind, and the water as if they were part of a larger family. Through this way of seeing the world, he invited others to develop a sense of gratitude and care for the environment around them. One of his most famous expressions of this outlook is a prayer that praises God for all elements of creation. In this prayer, he gives thanks for the beauty and usefulness of the natural world. It reflects a spirit of joy, humility, and appreciation. For Francis, nature was not just something to observe but something to honor and protect. As his influence continued to grow, Francis faced new challenges. Leading a community required balance and wisdom. He had to guide others while remaining true to the simplicity that defined his own life. This was not always easy, especially as the movement expanded and attracted attention from different parts of society. Despite these challenges, Francis remained committed to his original vision. He continued to live simply, often choosing the most basic conditions even when he could have chosen comfort. His consistency strengthened the trust people had in him and reinforced the message he was sharing. Francis also reached out beyond his immediate surroundings. At one point, during a time of conflict between different cultures and religions, he traveled to meet a leader from another tradition. This journey reflected his desire for peace and understanding. Rather than approaching others with hostility, he sought dialogue and respect. This aspect of his life highlights his commitment to building bridges rather than divisions. As the years passed, the physical toll of his lifestyle began to affect his health. Living without comfort, traveling frequently, and dedicating himself entirely to service placed great demands on his body. He began to experience illness and weakness, yet his spirit remained strong. Even in suffering, he continued to encourage those around him and to focus on prayer and gratitude. In the later part of his life, Francis became even more reflective. He spent time in quiet contemplation, deepening his understanding of faith and his connection to God. Those who were close to him noticed a sense of peace and clarity that seemed to grow stronger despite his physical condition. Near the end of his life, Francis gathered his companions and offered them guidance. He reminded them to remain faithful to the principles they had embraced: humility, simplicity, and love. He encouraged them to continue serving others and to remain grounded in their purpose, even as the community continued to grow. In the year 1226, Francis passed away. He died surrounded by those who had walked alongside him and who had been transformed by his example. His passing marked the end of his earthly life, but it did not mark the end of his influence. In many ways, it was only the beginning. After his death, the Franciscan community continued to grow and spread across different regions. His teachings were preserved and shared, inspiring new generations to follow a similar path. Over time, his example influenced not only religious communities but also broader cultural and social perspectives. Today, Saint Francis of Assisi is remembered as a symbol of peace, compassion, and humility. His life speaks to people from all backgrounds, offering a message that is both simple and profound. In a world that often values success and accumulation, his example reminds us of the importance of kindness, generosity, and connection. His deep respect for nature has also made him an important figure in discussions about environmental care. Many people see in his life a model for how to live in harmony with the world around us. His perspective encourages a sense of responsibility and gratitude that remains relevant today. Saint Francis is remembered as a man who chose a radically different path from the one that was expected of him. At a time when wealth, power, and honor were highly valued, he chose simplicity, poverty, and kindness. The story of Saint Francis is not just a story from the past. It is a living message that continues to inspire. It shows that transformation is possible, that a single decision can change the direction of a life, and that choosing compassion can have a lasting impact on the world. His journey from a young man seeking recognition to a figure known for humility and love is a powerful reminder that true fulfillment comes from within. It invites each of us to reflect on our own lives and to consider what truly matters. Thanks for watching. See you next time.